Hello everyone, I am Laurie Ollhoff, Assistant Director at the T.B. Scott Free Library, and this is another edition of Digital Bytes. Today's Digital Byte will cover an introduction to diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, and the terminology that is frequently used. So just to clarify, we're going to take a look at IDEA and DEAI. We're going to clarify these common acronyms that are often referenced when talking about diversity and inclusion. Now, the acronym IDEA originated in the field of education, more specifically in the area of special education. When diversity and equity, accessibility, and inclusion became a prominent topic of discussion, many organizations, including the library realm, leaned on to the IDEA acronym, which has caused some confusion. While acronyms are often reused, it is important to understand the intended purpose of the acronym's use. So we felt it important to acknowledge that here in this Digital Byte. We also would like to mention that this is going to be a part of a series that will cover diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. And covering these terms for you will hopefully build on a foundation for you in order to better understand what we cover in the future. So this is definitely more than meets the eye. The area of discussion is bigger than any one of us. So we are doing this together because together we are better. That is why the collaborative committee from WVLS and NWLS, referred to as the IDEA Team, is working to develop a Digital Byte series that libraries will find useful as they move towards a more inclusive, equitable, accessible, and diverse environment for their patrons. So there is some common language. We often hear the words that you find here on the screen, and we are going to take a look at those briefly for you to better understand the meanings that are intended, at least through our discussion and our presentations in the future Digital Bytes. We're going to start out with diversity. So this is all the ways that people are different and the same at the individual and group levels. Even when people appear the same, they are different. So there are four major types that they refer to when you hear about the diversity. There's an internal, the external, organizational, and worldview. The organizational diversity requires examining and questioning the makeup of a group to ensure that multiple perspectives are represented. So when we take a look at inclusion, yeah, that's a tree with a lot of different people hanging out there. And when we look at inclusion, it's the intentional practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those who have physical or mental disabilities and members of other minority groups. For example, when you're taking a look at your library's collection, are you promoting books, articles, videos, and other resources by and about people from marginalized groups? Those are some things that we will take a look at. So when it comes to equality, we're looking at each individual or group of people. They're given the same resources or opportunities. There are some essential principles of equality that I want to point out to you. So there's one, the right to recognition of the equal worth and equal dignity of each human being. Two, the right to equality before the law. Three, the right to equal protection and benefit of the law. Four, the right to be treated with the same respect and consideration as all others. Five, the right to participate on an equal basis with others in any area of economic, social, political, cultural, or civic life. So equality often is confused with equity in our English language. In this instance, equity is defined as the state, quality, or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. The concept of equity is synonymous with fairness and justice. It is helpful to think of equity as not simply a desired state of affairs or a lofty value. To achieve and sustain equity, it needs to be thought of as a structural and systemic concept. Again, how do we look at that in our libraries? As I mentioned, equality versus equity, those two terms are often confused. This graphic, I'm sure many of you have seen with the kids at the fence, and it shows the equality, what that looks like, equity. So, they bring in the boxes and say, okay, now, everybody has access to it, they all can see it. But I've seen it go even further into the justice mode, where they've actually just removed that fence, that big barrier, and opened it up so that everyone can see just from where they are standing. So when we're looking at equality versus equity, all of the resources are available equally to everyone, right? So, however, is that equal amount of resources divided up fairly and offered up fairly? Or in this instance, equitably? Often, race-focused conversations derail because people are using the same terms in different ways. And one of the challenges of communicating effectively about race is to move people from that narrow and individualized definition of racism to a more comprehensive and systemic awareness. So we're getting into the accessibility, giving that equitable access to everyone. The Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education defines accessibility as meaning when a person with a disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without disability in an equally integrated and equally effective manner with substantially equivalent ease of use. Here the key phrases are equally integrated, equally effective, and substantially equivalent ease of use. This definition sets a bar that guarantees individuals with disabilities are provided with the materials and necessary formats and technologies with appropriate features in a timely manner. So when we look at equity and equality, diversity, inclusion, what many of us don't realize is that there is a conscious and an unconscious bias that exists. So our definition for conscious bias in general, it's a bias is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way that's considered to be unfair. Biases may be held by an individual, a group, or institution and can have negative or positive consequences. So for conscious bias, also known as explicit bias, a person is very clear about his or her feelings and attitudes, and related behaviors are conducted with intent. And that's what you're looking at when you're looking at a conscious bias. There is some intent there. They realize what they're doing at that time. But what a lot of us don't realize, we are experiencing unconscious bias when it comes to the area of racism. This is also known as implicit bias. Simply put, it is how our minds get in the way of our best intentions. Think about it. It's the way our mind gets in the way of our best intentions. Unconscious bias is far more prevalent than conscious prejudice and often incompatible with one's conscious values. Certain scenarios can activate unconscious attitudes and beliefs. For example, biases may be more prevalent when multitasking or working under time pressure. We just don't realize it. So there are some, circumstances that affect how we think about things unconsciously, just are not aware of it. So the next term that we often see referred to when looking at inclusion and diversity is the LGBTQ community. On this particular slide, I have included the acronym LGBTQIA, listed as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and or questioning, intersex, and asexual, and or ally. So this list of letters for this acronym can and does continue. As previously mentioned, the terms that are used to talk about the LGBTQ community are constantly evolving, and in an effort to be inclusive while maintaining the practicality of a shorter acronym, some people use symbols in the acronym as well, and you will find that in various resources and materials. So when we're talking about a person's disability, again, the ADA defines a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. This includes people who have a record of such an impairment, even if they do not currently have a disability. It also includes individuals who do not have a disability but are regarded as having a disability. The ADA also makes it unlawful to discriminate against a person based on that person's association with a person with a disability as well. And as you can see from the visual on this slide, that disability can come in various formats, hard of hearing, vision impairment, wheelchair bound. There are various formats of that disability. Race. So race is usually associated with biology and linked with physical characteristics such as hair texture or skin color, and covers a relatively narrow range of options. Yet people of similar complexions, hair textures can be defined as different races, and definitions in the United States have changed over time. So that looks differently. That's changed over the years. And then when it comes to ethnicity, race and ethnicity are often confused or aren't understood entirely. When we're talking about ethnicity, it's a broader term than race. The term is used to categorize groups of people according to their cultural expression and identification. Commonalities such as racial, national, tribal, religious, linguistic, or cultural origin may be used to describe someone's ethnicity. While someone may say their race is black, their ethnicity might be Italian, or someone may say their race is white, but their ethnicity is Irish. So it's that identification of a group more based on the cultural distinctiveness that makes that group of people. And so what is the difference between race and ethnicity? Ethnicity refers to that, again, that identification of a group based on those cultural distinctiveness that makes the group into a people. This distinctiveness is believed to be expressed in language, music, their values, art, styles, literature, their family life, their religion, the rituals that they follow, food, their naming process, public life, and material culture. The cultural comprehensiveness, a unique set of cultural characteristics perceived as expressing themselves in commonly unique ways across the social, cultural life of a population, characterizes the concept of ethnicity. It revolves around not just a population, a numerical entity, but a people, a comprehensively unique cultural entity. And that's what we're looking at when we're looking at that ethnicity. The equitable part of that involves trying to understand and give people what they need to enjoy that full, healthy lives. And we're talking about that with equity and equality and race and ethnicity. So we covered just a few terms that we see often used with diversity and inclusion. And you will see here there are presentation resources that I refer to when working on this presentation. I found them to be quite helpful. I encourage you to take a look at those resources as well. And we will be introducing more resources to you in our future Digital Bytes. Until then, if you have any further questions, my contact information is provided to you here. Thank you for taking the time to view this Digital Byte. Again, as previously mentioned, there will be additional Digital Bytes that will address topics introduced in this introduction today. So stay tuned. Have a great rest of your day.